explain the title of your most recent video? What will you fuel your time machine to climate level authority with?
Yeah,
that is a very
not
complex
obvious.
Sentence. That's a complex sentence.
That's not obvious. Come on,
Yeah.
Sam. That's the most obvious title I've ever made.
Are we going forward or backward in time?
So, I talked in an earlier video this week. I talked about authority is to climate as competence is to weather. And so John Vervaeke talks about the fact that people, when they see their parents basically as competence, oh gosh, here we go. This is the way this corner goes. They see their parents as competent, then their parents develop authority. But authority is sort of like climate. You know, you can have thunderstorms and things, but authority sort of holds up. And basically what's been happening over, we're in a long collapse of authority in our culture. And authority is necessary for navigation, and authority is necessary for community. And so part of what's fueling, so then I did this amazing conversation with Ray that's still in No Wait, No Ads, but it's coming out soon, where he tells this whole story about growing up in a cult and then his mother in a fundamentalist church and then going to Tim Keller's church in New York City and then eventually going to Orthodoxy. And, I'm talking to Cale about the whole Catholic situation with Francis. And, so much of this stuff just boils down to authority, that there is no shared authority. People are looking for authority. And in many ways, and many churches are sort of trying to imagine the church to be a time machine to take them back to, let's say, the early church or to the 5th century or to the Reformation. So let's go back to a place where authority is still there, and then I can navigate the world, and then we can have our community. But right now, part of what's happening, let's say for people going to Orthodoxy, is they're trying to fuel their time machine with what? With liturgy, or with
ancient credibility,
ancient credibility, the Word of God, the preaching of the Word, the Eucharist, and the papacy. So I'm rereading this book on Vatican I because Vatican I and Vatican II are very much connected. And Vatican I is in the 19th century when the church is just losing and losing and losing, and they're losing the papal states. And suddenly it's like, we need to get control here. Well, how can we get control? Well, why don't we have an infallible papacy? That'll get it back. And it's like, so, and there's often a case where the more and more felt authority someone loses, the higher they, they
ratchet up. Yeah.
They ratchet up the symbolism. But nobody
relates to parenting,
anymore.
Right? When your kids aren't listening to you, sometimes you feel like you need to yell with a louder voice. Sometimes that kind of works. Sometimes you have to listen to me because I'm your dad works, but it also works best if you can have that sort of deeper level of respect that gets built up. And sometimes saying you need to respect me more doesn't.
It shows the weakness.
It shows the weakness, which sort of undermines the request. Yeah.
If you have to remind your children that you're their father, it already shows you're really down a lot of chips.
Yeah. If you have to remind people that you're the Pope. But I think that, in this kind of crisis of institutional credibility, right? Institutions are one of the things that they can do is that they can have credibility at the institution level, and then people fill in the roles in the institution, and they can get respect that they didn't earn as a person, but is respect that the institution has earned for them. But then you have to do the thing where you're living into your role in the institution, right?
Right.
And you're not just the person, you have the vest or the uniform or the title or whatever it is.
Right.
That, kind of is the way of putting on the cloak of the institutional authority. But institutions seem to be shooting themselves in the foot. And a lot of this has been activism inside of people within institutions that have some goal that's larger than the institution, that they're using the institution as a vehicle for an agenda or a goal that's bigger than that. And that's been a big part of the decline in the respective institutions, is activism, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
The long march through the institutions mostly just weakened the institutions.
Yeah. Ironically, and one would argue the Protestant Reformation did the same thing. It was a movement to ostensibly reform the church, but what it did was weaken the church. But you can also argue that it did strengthen the church too, because
sometimes the church needs to be weakened. You know, if a church is corrupt and using its power badly, then that weakening is what needs to happen. Like Ross Douthat's column on the death of Pope Francis was excellent. I suppose he's been writing it for the past 5 years, and so that's why it can be excellent. But I mean, that was his point, right? Is that Pope Francis, by being a lot of Francis and not just a lot of Pope, weakened the respect for the authority of the papacy, especially by going after conservatives and traditionalists who had the most inherent natural respect for the institution and the position itself. He weakened them the most. It was the liberals who already had weakened respect for the position. And so he weakened the respect in the place where it was strongest. And so now the respect for the institution is a lot weaker, but maybe that's what needed to happen, because this revival seems to be happening despite the growth in Catholicism that you see, at least, or the places where Catholicism is growing, Catholicism is still declining on the whole. The places where the growth is happening seems completely unrelated and almost anti-correlated with anything Pope Francis ever did or wanted.
Right. Which makes you sort of ask the question if this revival of traditional Catholicism isn't in a strange way fundamentally Protestant.
Yeah. I think it is. Yeah. Hank is still a Protestant. Let's just be clear. He's just a Protestant who goes to a Catholic church.